that I worried about the most, which I thought that Neil and Buzz would go on down and have a successful landing. And a lot of our equipment was duplicated, but when it came to their return to me, they had one engine bell, one combustion chamber, and that had to work perfectly to lift them up back to my orbit.
When in 1969 America applauded Neil Armstrong and Edwin Aldrin, the first ones to step onto the surface of the moon, few pondered how they had ended up there. Major achievements of the entire country distracted from news and everyday problems. For many years, Americans lived in fear of a possible war with the Soviet Union, and the rivalry between the countries was steadily escalating. The Vietnam War was ongoing, and many families worried about their loved ones sent to the front lines. It's remarkable how space discoveries, once a part of the technology and arms race, began to inspire and uplift ordinary people. But that wasn't the primary goal of the government. The United States needed to be capable of engaging in combat at any level, including in space. No one knew the opponent's next move. Therefore, long before the American flag was planted on the moon, the government had a trump card up its sleeve. Within the engineering headquarters and among NASA scientists, a man who had created the V-2 rocket, a weapon of Nazi Germany that devastated England in 1944, was working on and developing cutting-edge spacecraft. How did a man who faced trial after World War II end up in the United States? And how did the Apollo 11 mission prevent the Cold War from turning into a hot confrontation? Let's find out together. The very idea of sending a human into space for the benefit of humanity was driven by far from peaceful intentions. People all around the world needed civil aviation and light aircraft for their daily lives, to move from place to place, work in the fields, monitor forests, and deliver mail. The invention of the airplane emerged alongside the observation of the natural world, including birds, and evolved into an attempt to understand how our bodies differ. Using various contraptions, ancient scientists experimented uncovering the principles that support a living creature in the air. Attempts at flight or gliding often ended up tragically but yielded increasing knowledge, leading to the creation of the first functional aircraft in the 19th century. Their history began long before World War I, where aviation was inevitably used by all sides. The airplane was designed for the benefit of people during peacetime. In contrast, space technologies were developed to carry the threat of death. The military needed communication, reconnaissance of enemy positions, something capable of carrying projectiles and destroying enemy equipment. No one would create an Earth satellite just to test if it would stay in orbit or for the sake of whimsical design and charming signals that became symbols of space exploration. Those were fairly friendly goals. Every launch had to serve one purpose: to show the opponent that your army, your country was more powerful, resourceful, and dangerous. The confrontation between the USA and the USSR, known as the Cold War, began immediately after the fall of Germany. The prolonged trials of the Nazis were supposed to dampen the enthusiasm of all conflict participants. The consequences of World War II were grim and significantly weakened all countries within the conflict zone, while others experienced indirect effects on their economies and social spheres. While the media loudly condemned the Nazis and asserted the USA quietly facilitated the release from prison and resettlement to Boston of the leader of the blacklisted German scientists and engineers. In July 1969, Apollo 11 embarked on its journey to the moon, propelled by the heavy-lift rocket, the Saturn V, a unique creation by NASA. Even in 2023, it remains the only launch vehicle that has successfully carried humans beyond low Earth orbit. President of the United States John F. Kennedy referred to the development of the Saturn rockets as an opportunity to surpass the Soviet Union in the space race. Indeed, this series possessed unparalleled power and reliability, and to this day none of them have experienced a failure. Originally designed for launching payloads into low Earth orbit, the Saturn rockets carried 24 astronauts into space, even though they were initially conceived as a military project for satellite delivery. Thanks to numerous speeches by the president, who in 1961 set the goal of landing a man on the moon, the militaristic image of the mission transformed into a scientific and patriotic one. Interestingly, the last time Kennedy mentioned the significance of the Saturn rockets was in a speech delivered at Brooks Air Force Base in San Antonio. the day before his assassination. Behind this epical, game-changing project that altered the course of American space exploration stands the Nazi scientist and engineer Wernher von Braun, a key acquisition for the USA secretly extracted from the post-war Germany. It's likely that this man was destined for a tribunal, imprisonment, and a lifetime ban from any technical activities. However, the American military desperately needed the man who had created devastatingly powerful rockets for the German army. The Blacklist, led by von Braun, consisted of the authors of these developments, individuals with whom interviews were deemed necessary and their knowledge preserved for use by the American army. Wernher von Braun was undoubtedly a brilliant engineer who, by a twist of fate, found himself in the wrong place at the wrong time, limiting his work to military industries. However, few people are aware that American scientists were also involved in his projects. Germany showed interest in the research of an American scientist named Robert Goddard, one of the early space engineers in the United States and the creator of the liquid-fueled rocket engine. Until 1939, German specialists corresponded with him to discuss technical matters. Wernher von Braun, who began his career in 1933, used plans that Goddard had published in various journals when designing his rockets, including the Aggregate series. In 1963, reflecting on the development of rocketry, he spoke about Goddard's research in the following manner. His rockets. By today's standards, they might seem somewhat primitive, but they left a noticeable legacy and already incorporated many elements used in the most modern rockets and spacecraft. In 1944, shortly before the Nazis began firing V-2 rockets at England, Robert Goddard confirmed that Wernher von Braun's team had used his publications and developments. On June 13, 1944, during German tests, one of the rockets exploded over southwest Sweden due to an operator error. A month and a half later, the British exchanged the wreckage of this rocket for several mobile radar units. These units were then sent to the USA to a laboratory in Annapolis, where Goddard was conducting research for the US Navy. The engineer identified components from the rocket he had designed in the 1930s. Early in his career, while meeting with some of Europe's leading engineers and working in the experimental laboratory for the practical development of liquid-fueled rocket engines for ballistic missiles, which was under the guidance of Captain Walter Dornberger, the father of German rocketry, Wernher von Braun frequently mentioned ideas about space travel. One story is often cited in the media. After attending a presentation by Auguste Piccard, a pioneer of stratospheric flight, the young student von Braun approached him and said, "You know, someday I plan to go on a journey to the moon." However, 15 years later, rockets based on his work did not go to the moon, but rather toward London. Even while working for the United States, von Braun distanced himself from any deep ties with Nazi Germany. Like many engineers of his time, he was compelled to work solely in the defense industry, preparing weaponry for his homeland's potential revenge after the devastating aftermath of World War I. Journalists often encounter similar stories of individuals who didn't want to be separated from their beloved pursuits, hoping to continue what they truly enjoyed in a peaceful context. Von Braun, who appeared in several key photos of the Reich, claimed that he did not wear the uniform willingly and only did so out of necessity in unavoidable situations. The engineer's name is also associated with the use of forced labor from concentration camps. On August 15, 1944, Wernher von Braun wrote a letter to Albin Sawatzky, who oversaw the production of the V-2 rocket. In this letter, he agreed to personally select workers from the Buchenwald concentration camp to work on the project. In the book Wernher von Braun Rocket Night, the scientist repeatedly claims that he saw the terrible living conditions of his workers, but he could not do anything to improve them. Allegations were repeatedly made that von Braun personally participated in the cruel treatment of prisoners, witnessed executions, and imposed physical punishments. The accused himself stated that he never saw any cruel treatments or killings, and that he had only heard rumors that some of the prisoners were hanged in underground galleries. History does know other engineers and scientists who found themselves in similar situations, but skillfully undermined the effectiveness of their work. For instance, there were beautifully designed tanks by Ferdinand Porsche that couldn't go anywhere. However, Wernher von Braun's rocket did not align with his statements of disdain for the German authorities. They were effective, destructive, and deadly, ultimately earning their creator an honorary first place on the blacklist. And furthermore, they provided him with a unique knowledge base and experience that proved to be extremely valuable for the US Navy and Army. Braun was one of the scientists for whom the US government fabricated life stories and erased all information about their membership in the NSDAP, Nazi Party, and ties to the Nazi government. This was done to allow the scientists to live and work in the United States without the risk of prosecution and arrest. The operation was called Paperclip, named after the paperclips used to attach new biographies to their US government scientific personnel documents. President Truman launched it to prevent Germany's scientific and engineering potential from falling into the hands of Britain and the Soviet Union. Of course, the documents stated that scientists with connections to Nazism could not be rehabilitated. The manipulations with the documents remained a secret from the general public, but not for long. Walter Riedel, the chief design engineer under Braun, revealed the presence of the legendary engineer in America. In December 1946, the media published an article with the headline, "German scientist says American food is not very tasty, and chicken tastes like rubber." This article mentioned that Wernher von Braun's team was in the USA, which drew criticism from the scientific community, including Albert Einstein. The first 2 years of von Braun's stay in the United States were dedicated to interrogations, gathering and transferring information, projects, and concepts. He also wrote books and articles for popular magazines. In 1957, when the Soviet Union launched Sputnik 1 on the R-7 ICBM, capable of delivering a nuclear warhead to the USA, the approach to space exploration changed. The military and the government began seriously considering the possibility of sending Americans into space. They turned to Wernher von Braun's team, which was involved in the development and testing of the Jupiter rocket. Thus, in 1960, the German scientist and his colleagues found themselves at NASA and began working on the significant, globally important project involving the Saturn rocket series and Apollo spacecraft. Let's go back to July 1969, a historic moment, the prime opportunity for American space exploration, which had suffered another setback at the hands of the USSR, the first to send a human into space. The first mission to land a human on the moon was Apollo 11. Its crew consisted of 3 astronauts, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. They were well aware of the dangers that lay ahead. The astronauts wanted their families to be provided for in case their lunar mission ended in disaster. NASA provided them with basic life insurance, but it was not a substantial amount, and they could not afford more on their own. Insurance companies deemed the mission too risky and refused to underwrite it. So the astronauts secretly signed commemorative envelopes from Apollo 11 and passed them on to their families. These envelopes, adorned with space-themed images and stamps, earned them the nickname Apollo Insurance Covers. If the men were to die, their families could sell these envelopes to collectors. On the morning before the Apollo 11 launch, the crew enjoys the traditional astronauts' breakfast, consisting of steak and eggs. After spending the day preparing for liftoff, they make their way to their spacecraft. The sun inches above the horizon. Despite it being midsummer in Florida, the rocket is covered in frost due to the super-chilled liquid oxygen inside. As they prepare for liftoff, the astronauts can see over 1 million spectators along the coastline. In the lead-up to the launch, locals and tourists flock to Cape Canaveral's shoreline, anticipating what promises to be the greatest show on Earth. People set up picnics, crack open drinks, and wave American flags. The VIP area is teeming with politicians and celebrities. Furthermore, the astronauts can see Launch Pad 34, where their colleagues from the Apollo 1 mission tragically perished in a cabin fire during a training exercise in 1967. However, there is no turning back now. The massive Saturn V rocket will launch Apollo 11 and its crew into space. It's like going to work on a nuclear bomb. A fully fueled Saturn V weighs over 2.8 million kilograms. It stands at a height of 111 meters, which is 18 meters taller than the Statue of Liberty. It operates in 3 stages, with each stage detaching after completing its function. The rocket generates a thrust of 34.5 million newtons at liftoff, which is greater than 85 Hoover dams. due to the heat it generates, a 3-mile exclusion zone is required around the launch site. Spectators won't hear the engines firing for almost 15 seconds. It will appear to them as though Saturn V is ascending in silence. In the White House, President Nixon watches the events closely on television. The chief speechwriter for the president, Sapphire, received a difficult assignment the day before. He had to write a speech that the president would deliver on television in the event of the astronaut's death on the moon. It was a very tough task. Bill sent his text to Bob Haldeman, the chief of staff to the president. The speech praised the courage, self-sacrifice, and spirit of exploration. The text was very inspirational, but everyone hoped it would never have to be delivered. NASA's director, Professor Werner von Braun, prayed for the successful launch. Some people criticized him for being too cautious, saying that the Soviet Union had already sent a man into space. Braun understood clearly that the Apollo 11 mission could change everything. His prayers were answered. At 9:32 a.m. local time, the Saturn V rocket began its ascent into the sky, carrying Apollo 11 into space. At 10:56 a.m. EDT, Neil Armstrong became the first person to set foot on the moon. Back on Earth, millions of people at a distance of 240,000 miles eagerly awaited to hear what he would say. He uttered his famous words, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." Aldrin captured video footage of Armstrong's first step on the lunar surface from the lunar module called Eagle. Then, he also descended to the surface and closed the door to preserve the limited air supply. Aldrin surveyed the gray and white lunar landscape, and above them, the astronauts could see Earth, which appeared incredibly small, like a plate. "Magnificent desolation," he remarked. When Armstrong concurred, Aldrin continued, "Magnificent desolation." The footage captured by the Apollo 11 team was a true gift to the American nation. The achievement, unparalleled by anyone before and unlikely to be replicated by anyone else, demonstrated technical, intellectual, and thus military superiority. The sense of pride and unity it installed in people was immensely important. The Apollo 11 astronauts, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins, better than anyone else knew that many details crucial to the success of the mission were experimental. Despite excessive testing, not everything could be foreseen and verified to provide guarantees for both a successful launch and return. Returning to the cramped lunar module, Aldrin notices a crucial switch has broken. One of them accidentally bumped into it. If they can't fix the switch, the Eagle won't lift off. Orbiting above, Collins risks returning home alone. Aldrin reaches out to Mission Control for help, but they can't provide a solution. 2 lives and a nearly successful mission hang in the balance. Can they find a replacement for the broken switch? However, any metal object is unacceptable, as there is a risk of short-circuiting the entire system. Aldrin decides to use a felt-tip pen from his shoulder pocket. He presses it onto the damaged switch, and it starts working. Armstrong and Aldrin, as instructed by NASA's Charlie Duke, unload all unnecessary items onto the lunar surface and try to take a nap. It's not easy. They have to sleep in their spacesuits because there's lunar dust everywhere inside the Eagle, and they couldn't close the door during their surface activities. The temperature is around 60 degrees Fahrenheit. It's quite noisy, and there is no room to lie down fully extended. Hammocks for astronauts haven't been invented yet. After resting for about 2 hours, they begin preparations for liftoff. At 5:35 p.m., the Eagle docks with its companion in lunar orbit. After reuniting, the American heroes had to head home and test their luck once more. Their module could have been burned up during re-entry if the heating temperature exceeded the planned limit. While awaiting their landing, the crew conducted television broadcasts, showing views of Earth and the Moon through the windows, sharing details of their daily lives, and narrating motivating stories. The astronauts were informed that President Nixon would be arriving at their landing site. On July 24th, the command module splashed down in the waters between the Marshall Islands and the Hawaiian Islands. The spacecraft was initially upside down, with its nose in the water, but it was righted to its normal position using inflatable flotation bags within 7 minutes and 40 seconds. 3 scuba divers were dropped from a helicopter and attached a special flotation collar to the command module. 2 inflatable boats and another scuba diver in a protective suit were also deployed from the helicopter. This diver treated the command module's hatch with a disinfectant, opened it, handed 3 similar suits to the crew, and then closed the hatch. The astronauts put on the suits and one by one entered the inflatable boat. Next, the astronauts were transferred to a helicopter, and after 63 minutes, they were brought to the aircraft carrier USS Hornet, which had approached the splashdown site. The command module was also recovered and brought aboard the carrier. Upon arrival, the astronauts were directed to the quarantine facility, where a doctor and technician were waiting for them. To welcome the Apollo 11 crew, President Richard Nixon, NASA Administrator Thomas Paine, and astronaut Frank Borman arrived on the aircraft carrier. They were able to communicate with the astronauts through a glass door of the quarantine facility. From this point onward, the phase of analyzing the mission's results began. Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins spent 21 days in quarantine under the observation of doctors. This period was considered the maximum time for the development of any infections. Scientists were keen to prevent the potential introduction of previously unknown bacteria or viruses from the lunar surface. At the same time, cases of insufficient caution during the examination of lunar rock samples were identified one by one, leading to 24 laboratory employees also being placed in quarantine. Fortunately, all concerns proved to be unfounded. Lunar dust did not pose any biological threat to Earth. For this flight, von Braun was awarded the NASA Medal for Distinguished Service. The ideas for building a base on the moon that he developed could not be realized due to the end of the competition between the United States and the Soviet Union in lunar exploration. Both countries halted lunar programs and froze funding for the direction. Professor Braun's research became the foundation for other scientists and engineers who were involved in rocket development and space exploration, and the results of the Saturn rocket series work have not been surpassed in reliability to this day. Wernher von Braun can and should be criticized for his lack of attention to astronauts. The spacecraft were designed to achieve results, often neglecting the comfort of the people on board. It might have been possible to preserve the lives and health of astronauts and mission team members in various years. Yes, engineering solutions to reduce weight, resistance, and other parameters sometimes required removing parts of the spacecraft's skin and equipment, and sometimes things were not initially considered, such as the exterior door handle on the Eagle of Apollo 11. Professor Braun's military past was evident in the details. A tendency to manipulate information, whitewash reputation, treat those working for you as a resource, and focus on victory in war rather than scientific achievements. Fortunately, in the Apollo 11 team there were those who cared for the ultimate heroes, who risked their lives before the eyes of the whole world. Despite criticism and skepticism about the mission's results, the United States achieved the prize that the German engineer had hoped for. On the day of the Apollo 11 astronauts landing on the moon, July 20, 1969, the USSR sent a congratulatory message to the United States. Chairman of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR, Nikolai Viktorovich Podgorny, sent a telegram of congratulations to President of the United States Richard Nixon. In this telegram, he congratulated the American people and government on the successful execution of the Apollo 11 mission and the first ever landing of a human on the moon in world history. This gesture expressed recognition and respect from the USSR for the scientific research and achievements of the United States in space, despite the Cold War rivalry.